Let's talk about the WNBA and the league's demise now that Caitlin Clark is no longer going to play this season. The WNBA and the Indiana Fever, Stephanie White, Amber Cox, all the way up and including, let's just keep it real, Kathy Engelbert, Adam Silver, the National Basketball Association, everybody that participated in the farce.
The WNBA is facing its biggest nightmare yet because Caitlin Clark, the one player carrying the league on her back, is officially done for the season. And make no mistake, this isn't just about an injury. This is about the collapse of an entire business model built on her shoulders. We're talking about the Indiana Fever, Stephanie White, Amber Cox, Kathy Engelbert, Adam Silver, every single executive tied to this league. All of them are now under fire because Caitlin Clark's body broke down after months of brutal hits, ignored fouls, and nonstop targeting that fans saw with their own eyes and the officials chose to ignore, and now the result is a league-wide disaster. Fans are furious, demanding answers, refunds, even threatening boycotts, while the league stays silent. And the question everyone is asking is simple. How did the WNBA allow its brightest star to crumble in just 13 games? And what does the commissioner have to say now that the golden goose of women's basketball is sidelined, leaving the entire season hanging by a thread?
Caitlin Clark, out for the remainder of the 2025 season, something we all think we knew was coming after what Stephanie White said earlier today. We couldn't be too sure until we see it for ourselves. And with this announcement from the GOAT's mouth herself, Caitlin Clark won't be returning this season, nor if the Indiana Fever make the playoffs.
Caitlin Clark's season isn't just over. It's over in the most devastating way possible, because what started as a simple quad strain back in May spiraled into recurring groin issues through June and July, and finally collapsed with a brutal bone bruise in August. Her body breaking down piece by piece under relentless contact. And this isn't just a personal tragedy for her, it's a league-wide catastrophe because the one player who single-handedly packed arenas and lifted television ratings beyond anything the WNBA had ever seen is gone. And fans aren't just disappointed, they're furious, they're demanding refunds, calling for boycotts, flooding social media with outrage, because they all watched it happen in real time. They saw Clark shoved off screens, grabbed by the jersey, hammered on cuts, and night after night, referees stood there silent, swallowing their whistles while the face of the league was left to absorb punishment that would never be allowed in any other sport. And now, the bill has come due, Clark out for the rest of 2025, the Fever left gutted, and the WNBA exposed for letting its brightest star collapse before our very eyes.
Well, it all started last year, in her rookie season, where she received 20% of all the flagrant fouls in the league. And most of them came from Angel Reese and the Chicago Sky. And these weren't basketball plays. They were not only fouling her, but they were getting up, laughing about it, laughing about Caitlin Clark getting assaulted. Any other work environment, people go to jail for what's going on.
And what makes this disaster even worse is the undeniable pattern that built up game after game. Because this wasn't one isolated play, this wasn't one overly physical team, this was the entire league taking liberties with Caitlin Clark. Possession after possession, she was double-teamed before she even touched the ball, shoved into defenders, knocked off balance, and instead of protecting her, the referees just let it happen. Until even the Washington Post had to put it in writing, calling out the obvious targeting that everyone in the arena could see. And the most painful part for fans was the laughter. Opponents fouling her hard, then standing over her and mocking Angel Reese and the Chicago Sky, leading the charge with plays that didn't even resemble basketball. Clark getting hammered and players laughing about it while the officials swallowed their whistles. And if that happened in any workplace outside of sports, someone would be facing criminal charges. Yet, in the WNBA, the very player responsible for half the league's ratings spike was left completely unprotected, traveling from city to city, filling arenas in Las Vegas, New York, and Dallas. And instead of treating her like the investment she was, the league acted like she was just another rookie, ignoring the fact that every broadcast deal, every sponsorship check, and every record-breaking crowd was tied directly to Caitlin Clark's name. And still the officials refused to give her the most basic calls that stars in every other league receive every single night.
Notice how much it was just Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark was taking all the hits. Caitlin Clark was taking all the abuse. But this year they've added Sophie Cunningham. She gets more flagrant fouls on her than anybody in the league besides Caitlin Clark. And Aaliyah Boston, she's been taking hits as well. But the worst thing is the consistency. So they don't call flagrant fouls, or most of the time, Caitlin Clark could be held for an entire game at a time. They don't call fouls. They don't call common fouls.
This wasn't just frustrating to watch. It was downright dangerous, because those constant cheap shots don't just make a player sore. They pile up, they grind on muscles already strained. And that's exactly how Clark's quad tightened up in May, how her groin burned through June, and how her body finally gave out in July. None of it a mystery, all of it the predictable result of being battered night after night without protection. Every twisted landing, every denied cut, every uncalled shove pushing her closer to the breaking point. And yet she was still forced to play through it all, because empty arenas were not an option, because tickets were sold, broadcasts were locked in, and sponsors demanded she be on the floor. But by then, it wasn't just Clark anymore. Sophie Cunningham was taking the same punishment, absorbing more flagrant fouls than almost anyone else in the league alongside Aaliyah Boston. Yet, the whistles never came, and fans saw it, they knew it, they called it hypocrisy, because the league was more than happy to sell out games on Clark's name while refusing to give her the same basic respect that keeps stars safe in every other sport. And that's how a promising season turned into a slow-motion disaster everyone could see coming. The hypocrisy could not be clearer, because on one hand, the WNBA paraded record ticket sales, sold-out merchandise, and massive new sponsorships all riding on Caitlin Clark's back, but on the other hand, they treated her like just another rookie, leaving her to get hammered possession after possession without the most basic level of protection. And the result wasn't just unfair games, it was a season put at risk, a league put in jeopardy. Because when you let the face of your sport get battered, you're not just risking one injury, you're threatening the entire future, and fans felt that betrayal deeply. They saw Clark filling arenas from New York to Chicago to Las Vegas. They saw her sell out road games at NBA-sized venues. They saw her become the literal engine of growth. And yet every night the refs refused to grant her even the superstar whistles that are automatic in every other league. Instead, bodies were flying into her cuts, defenders hand-checking her out of space, stopping her movement before plays even began. And what should have been a golden opportunity to elevate women's basketball was thrown away by negligence and greed, leaving the very player who carried the sport broken on the sideline while the league's credibility crumbled right alongside her season. Caitlin Clark's game is unlike anything the WNBA has ever seen, and that's exactly why this disaster stings so much, because her style isn't just good basketball, it's electric, it's magnetic, it's what pulls fans in. She's got the deep range of Steph Curry, the confidence of Kobe Bryant, the flair that makes every possession feel like a highlight reel, and people respond to that in a way they never did with anyone else. Yes, we've seen legends like Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi, but Clark brought a completely different energy, a combination of skill, personality, and showmanship that resonated with audiences far outside the traditional WNBA base, and that's why her absence isn't just a setback, it's a collapse, because the league desperately needed her to keep casual fans hooked, networks invested, and arenas packed. And instead, they left her exposed, mocked, and targeted until her body finally broke down. And now, the very thing that made the league relevant is gone, leaving fans angry, betrayed, and convinced that the WNBA has no idea how to protect its most valuable player. What makes this collapse even more infuriating is that it wasn't some freak accident. It was the direct result of negligence, because night after night, the referees allowed Clark to be hacked, shoved, and battered without consequence. And those no calls piled up until her body simply couldn't take it anymore. And the proof was right there for everyone to see. She grimaced through cuts that came up short. She lost the explosive first step that defined her drives. She was clearly laboring on the floor. Yet, instead of stepping in to protect her, the league doubled down, pushing her into back-to-back games, non-stop travel, and heavy minutes just to keep ticket sales alive. And in the end, that greed guaranteed the worst-case scenario, Clark's season-ending collapse. And now, the blame isn't just on bad luck. It's on a league that refused to value its stars' health over short-term profit, because the truth is clear, this wasn't an accident, it was a ticking time bomb the WNBA chose to ignore until it finally exploded. When the moment finally came for the league to address the disaster, fans were hoping for accountability, for leadership, for someone at the very top to admit the failures and promise change. But instead, what they got from Commissioner Kathy Engelbert was a hollow, sanitized statement that sounded more like a corporate press release than a human response. She spoke in vague optimism about growth and expansion while completely ignoring the reality everyone could see. That Caitlin Clark had been targeted night after night, that referees failed to do their jobs, and that the league's refusal to step in directly contributed to her collapse. And the silence on those issues was deafening because fans weren't asking for polished sound bites. They were demanding answers. They were demanding protection. They wanted to hear the words, "We failed and we will fix this." But instead, they got profit talk, ticket sales talk, revenue talk, and in that moment, it became painfully obvious that the WNBA cared more about its image than the health of the player who made that image possible. And that disconnect lit a firestorm of outrage that spread far beyond basketball, leaving Engelbert herself as the face of a league completely out of touch with its fans. The backlash was instant and brutal, because fans weren't just disappointed anymore, they were furious. Ticket prices for games that once sold out overnight collapsed on the resale market. All-Star Weekend in Indiana, that was supposed to be Clark's grand showcase, turned into a hollow event with angry fans demanding refunds. Entire arenas that had been packed just weeks earlier suddenly sat half empty, and television networks that gambled primetime slots on Clark's star power were left watching ratings nosedive. Sponsors who paid big money for the Clark effect suddenly found themselves tied to games nobody cared to watch, and what began as frustration over injuries exploded into a full-blown movement as fans organized boycotts, canceled tickets, and flooded social media with outrage, because they realized they weren't just being sold basketball, they were being sold false hope, strung along with day-to-day injury labels that insiders already knew were lies. And the trust that took one rookie season to build evaporated in a matter of weeks, leaving the WNBA staring at a financial and reputational collapse of its own making, all because it failed to protect the one player who carried the entire sport. And now, the WNBA is left staring at the consequences of its own failures. Because Caitlin Clark's season didn't end by chance, it ended because the league refused to protect her, refused to call fouls, refused to value her health over short-term profit, and in doing so, they broke the trust of the very fans who kept them alive. And that damage may be harder to repair than any injury, because fans aren't asking for hype anymore, they're demanding accountability, they want referees held responsible, they want leadership that actually protects players instead of selling them out. And until that happens, boycotts will grow louder, ratings will keep falling, and the credibility of the league will continue to crumble. Caitlin Clark will come back stronger. Her legacy is far from over, but the question now is whether the WNBA itself will survive the storm it created. Because once you lose the trust of your fans, once you show them that profit matters more than player safety, there may not be a second chance to earn it back.